So folks, listen as Dr. Habermas uses the critics' own arguments to show Jesus did claim to be God.
We ended the last program by mentioning the critical comeback that seems so obvious that, we got to face it right away. And that goes something like this. Don't take for granted that the red letter editions of the New Testament are exactly what Jesus said. How do you know that Jesus said what Mark said he said, what Luke said he said, what John said he said, what Matthew said he said? Now, I made a couple of claims last program that Jesus claimed to be Son of Man and Son of God. Let's take a look at a couple of these with critical methodology, a sort of a lowest common denominator, a text that's nothing but a book of ancient literature. Okay, the New Testament is a book of ancient literature. Let's think about this like the critics do. And let's address ourselves to the issue, did Jesus ever claim to be the Son of Man? Now, using a sort of Monday morning quarterbacking scenario, it goes something like this. When guys sit around on Monday morning, they remake yesterday's football game, and they make it in their own image. If you'd only done this, if you'd only done that. And really, that's what a lot of critics claim, that the gospel writers are putting words into Jesus' mouth. They're Monday morning quarterbacking Jesus' teaching. How do we know the Son of Man is not just an added teaching? Well, there's two important criteria that are given by the critics themselves, both of which are fulfilled by the Son of Man sayings. These are criterion of authenticity. Now, the first one is multiple attestation. If you have a saying in more than one source, you have a pretty good idea that this is authentic. In fact, the Jesus Seminar themselves used that criteria in the beginning of their book, The Five Gospels. Now, the teaching that Jesus was the Son of Man, it's his favorite self-designation, according to the Gospels, and it is found in all five, what are often called the traditional gospel strata. And the traditional gospel strata are Mark, M, the material that Matthew has that nobody else has, L, the material Luke has that no one else has, John, and this enigmatic sayings document that they call Q. 5 strata, and guess what? Son of Man appears in all 5. So it's pretty uniform that this is what Jesus called himself. Now, the comeback is, well, that just means it's a popular name. How do we know the church didn't make it up? And really what Son of Man means is it was the most popular title for Jesus when the Gospels were written, see? And they put it back in Jesus' mouth in 30 AD. But really what it was is the most popular title for him when the Gospels were written. That's the second. And this is called the criterion of dissimilarity. If Jesus did not get something from the Jews, and if Jesus' teachings are not found in the early church, probably they are authentic. This is the critical criterion of dissimilarity. And guess what? Son of Man cannot be laid at the feet of the Jews. They have a concept of Son of Man, but they would never apply it to Jesus. But what about the church? Isn't this a great example of Monday morning quarterbacking? They read their favorite designation back into the mouth of Jesus. So it's the favorite designation of Jesus when the Gospels were written. Doesn't work. It doesn't work because Jesus is never called the Son of Man in any of the New Testament epistles. In fact, he's not called Son of Man anywhere outside the Gospels except one place, and there it's talking about the heavenly exalted Son of Man. Earthly Son of Man, the earthly Jesus, is never called Son of Man anywhere else outside the Gospels, and only on the lips of Jesus, except in an instance where a man is simply reading that title, you say you're the Son of Man, back to Jesus. So it's a title distinctly on the lips of Jesus alone. In other words, let me unpack this just a little bit. It couldn't be a Monday morning later title read into the words of Jesus, because then it would be the church's favorite title, but it's not found in the church. So the best conclusion is, first of all, it's in all 5 layers, therefore it goes to Jesus. And secondly, it can't be dated to the Jews, it can't be dated to the church. Jesus must really have called himself the Son of Man. And now I've got a problem, because the Son of Man of Daniel 7, 13, and 14 is a very special figure, as we said before. Comes from the Ancient of Days. He's a pre-existent divine figure setting up God's kingdom on earth. And if Jesus claimed to be that, and you don't want to believe in the deity of Christ, now you're going up against a mountain of evidence.